in the ongoing series on human resource management, we are currently learning about the selection process, because it is the recruitment and selection process under the human resource management that brings in the best in class talent for an organization. And by now we are quite aware of the fact that people are very important, and not only people but the right people are important for an organization to bring in better performance, better productivity, a good corporate image. But how do people attract, how do people enter an organization? It is through the selection process. So as far as the selection process is concerned, we have learnt about the various steps and stages of selection, and in the previous couple of lectures we learnt about selection tests and interviews. So both these are tools of getting the right people for your organization. There are certain advantages and disadvantages of both selection tests as well as selection interviews. So as far as the previous lecture was concerned, we discussed about the various types of interviews, and we also learnt about the traits of an interviewer. So as far as the types of interviews are concerned, there can be a structured interview where the questions are in a structured or a patterned form, where the same questions are asked to every individual. Then there are unstructured or unguided interviews where questions are asked randomly depending upon the answers that the interviewee or the candidate is giving, and from the answers the subsequent questions are framed. Then there are panel interviews where the interviewers can be a panel, a committee, and the number of the interviewers is large. So they form a committee, and all these interviewers are basically experts in their fields. So they all judge their candidate. Then there are depth interviews because at times you need to delve deeper into an individual's personality. So just interviewing superficially might not work and might not get the actual information that is required. So in that case, depth interviews are conducted. And then there are other certain interviews like stress interviews are there, whereby the panel of experts pop in or throw questions randomly and without giving much time to the candidate to answer. And then there are face-to-face interviews, there can be video conferencing interviews, and we learnt all these types of interviews, and all these have their own advantages as well as disadvantages, and depending upon case to case and situation to situation, organizations might be using a number of these interviews. Then we also learnt about the traits of an interviewer. So it's not only the candidate that has to prepare for an interview, but even the interviewer must also be trained, because many a times the interview process fails or an organization fails to get the right talent just because of a faulty interviewing process, or because that the interviewer himself or herself was not properly trained to get the right people. So here two types of things can occur. You might be leaving behind a person who was talented, or you might hire a person who is not the right person or the right fit for the job and the organization. So in that case, as far as the traits of an interviewer are concerned, he or she must have a clear understanding of the vision and mission of their organization. He must be an authentic person, a warm person, a welcoming people's person, and he must be aware and he must be respectful of individual differences, and he should not be biased or prejudiced. He must not stereotype people. So all these things were discussed in the previous lecture on interviews. So moving further, in today's lecture we are going to cover certain further aspects of interviews. We'll learn about the guidelines for interviewing, what are the barriers to interviewing and how it can be overcome. Then we will learn about certain advantages and disadvantages of interviews, because as I said, as far as tests are concerned, interviews are concerned, there can be advantages as well as disadvantages for both. Then we are also going to learn about the objectives of a physical test. So once the interviews are over, the candidates are then required to undertake a physical test so that they can be determined and they can be assessed on their physical health. So this is the, we can say, an end of the interview process. So beginning with the guidelines for interviewing. So every HR manager or HR department or any department that is conducting an interview must understand and must pause and introspect as to what they want to do as far as interviewing is concerned. What they want to do, what they want to achieve, what is the goal of interviewing, when that interview must be conducted, where we are going to conduct the interview, why we need to conduct an interview, and how we are going to conduct an interview. So this planning part must be done in a very meticulous manner, and it is these whats and whens and wheres and whys and hows that lead to an effective interviewing. But most organizations, they fail to introspect all these aspects and they just jump into interviewing and hiring people, and that is then when they hire the wrong person and they leave upon the people they should be hiring. So these are very crucial questions that every manager who is hiring must assess. So you must understand the requirements of the job. So the interviewer also should be of a certain status, standing and experience. So only after a certain experience and after working for a particular period of time that you get to understand these things. A fresher cannot, take or conduct interviews. So an interviewer must be of certain status and know the requirements of job for which the interviews are being conducted. So that requirements of the job also must be clear in the mind of the interviewer. Then the second thing is that the interviewer should also possess requisite skills, training and experience. So he should be skillfully interviewing, because interviewing itself is an art, and like all other arts, it requires training and experience. So as I said, that it is only after attaining maturity and understanding and working in a particular organization or at a particular post, you get to understand people, you get to understand how jobs are done and how people fit into these jobs and the organization per se. So the interviews must be conducted by people who have those requisite skills and training. Then look into the relevant data carefully. So thoroughly study the relevant data about the candidate from the application blank, the tests and the preliminary interviews. So the application form, the tests and the preliminary interviews, they are we can say a bank of data, and the interviewer must study that relevant data so that he can form an image, he can at least form a basis for further decisions. So clearly understand what the job entails and what its requirements are. So apart from getting data about the candidate, get the data regarding the job also. That what are the qualifications, what are the skills, what are the competences, what level of knowledge a candidate should possess to perform that particular job. So that thing also must be clear in mind. Then before conducting the interview, enlist the must-haves and look out for those. So know that what traits an organization is looking for and whether the potential candidate has those traits or not. So that list of must-haves must be clear in the mind and it must be pre-planned. Then avoid focusing attention on the routine info. This is very important, and this is where most of the managers or hiring managers, they fail. So the time of interview should not be wasted in collecting routine information. So an applicant always submits his or her resume while applying. He has already undergone the selection test. And when you call an individual or the candidate for an interview, you are just repeating the questions. You are just getting the information that is already there in the resume. So why to waste your time and the candidate's time in asking questions or getting information that is already there in the resume? You already know that the candidate is an MBA in HR. So why are you asking that what is your qualification? So it is better that you ask a question that is more relevant, like you can ask him, why did you choose HR as a subject? Why not finance or any other specialization? So focus on the information that you haven't received till yet and that which you want to verify. The next is that examine the crucial factual information before forming an opinion. So you must assess the resume and the information that is being given by the candidate during the interview, and then you must examine that whether the candidate is lying or is it genuine. So there can be gaps in educational or employment history. So you must ask these questions. They are more relevant, and that is where you get more factual information about the candidate. That why did he fail in a particular class? Why is there an educational gap? Why is there an employment gap? So you must ask these questions and reasons for choosing special courses. So if the candidate has done certain diplomas or certain certification courses, ask the reason. So that is more of a factual information that must be collected. Then you can ask about academic achievements and reasons for failure if they are highlighted in their resume, or if the candidate himself or herself states that he failed in a particular exam or in a particular thing. So you can ask the reason for those failures. You can also ask the likes and dislikes for each job. So why is he applying for that particular job? What is in that job that he likes, and why not any other job? So these factual information dimensions must be collected. Then there should be no room for bias, prejudice in the process. So I have already elaborated this in the previous lecture also when we discussed about the traits of an interviewer. So it is very important, very crucial that the interview is conducted without any biases, without any prejudices. Personal likes and dislikes, preferences and general impression of the candidate should not interfere with the decision making process. Then also leave a good impression on the candidate. Even if you are not hiring the person, still be courteous, be respectful and leave a good impression on the candidate, because you are the brand ambassador of your organization, and when the candidate goes out, he will remember the treatment that he got. So always leave a good impression on the candidate. So next topic that we are going to cover today is the barriers to interview. Every process undertaken under the selection, be it the tests or the interviews, they are all very challenging, and there are barriers to these. So what are these barriers to effective interviewing? The first and foremost is failing to establish a rapport with the applicant. So when we were discussing about the interview process, we elaborated upon this point that it is very important that the applicant and the interviewer they establish a kind of rapport, a kind of relationship where the candidate or the applicant can openly and freely answer to your questions. And that is only possible when there is a kind of a relationship or a rapport among the two. But when the hiring manager or the interviewer is unable to establish that rapport, the candidate will never answer completely. He will not give the information that you are seeking. So this is the first and the foremost barrier that comes to mind when interviewing is concerned, that the manager fails to establish a rapport. Then the next barrier is not knowing what information is needed for successful job performance. So if I am hiring a person for a particular job, I must know what information I must seek, what information will validate or guarantee that this person would be successful while performing the job. So gather that information also. Apart from the information regarding the candidate, you must gather information needed for the successful job performance. So the next barrier is lack of a job description knowledge or an accurate appraisal of the critical job requirements. So this is an extension of the previous point that we discussed about information for the successful job performance. Many a times the managers, they are not aware of the job description. They do not have the knowledge of what all is to be done in a job and how to the appraisal of the critical job requirements. What are we seeking? What is the job all about? What will the candidate be doing? What knowledge level we need in a candidate to be performing the job successfully? So that lack of knowledge can lead to ineffective hiring. The next barrier is concentrating exclusively on applicant as a person. So applicant has layers to his personality. Every individual has. We are not what we look like always, and a 10-minute or a 15-minute interview cannot highlight every aspect of an individual. So the greater you delve deeper, the better information you get and better decisions you can make. So instead of concentrating only on the applicant as a person, as an individual, you must also try to identify the skills, the trainings, the certifications, the knowledge that the applicant possesses. And another barrier, and very important barrier to effective interviewing, is not remaining silent or listening long enough. Most of the times the interviewer keeps on talking and talking and doesn't listen to what the applicant is saying. Here again you fail as an interviewer because you are not giving the applicant enough space to express himself. And when you do not give that space, the candidate will not divulge with the information, with the knowledge that you are seeking. Next barrier is not allowing sufficient time to observe applicants' responses and behaviors. So this is again possible when the hiring manager is not listening and not observing how the applicant is responding and how he is behaving. And that is why an interview is conducted. We actually want to observe the applicants. we want to observe how they respond. So it is not only the answer, but it is the how of the answer, how you state, how you get irritated, how you lose your focus. These are the traits that are judged in an interview. And also how you behave. What are your interpersonal skills? Especially when we discussed in the types of interviews, we discussed about the case interviews where problem solving skills are judged. Then there are group discussions or group interviews where a group of applicants or group of candidates are given a particular situation or a particular topic where they have to discuss about the pros and the cons. So in that situation, each and every individual has to speak in whatever aspect they want to speak, and they have to come to a particular conclusion. So it is that point of time where you must observe how an applicant is responding, how an applicant respects other people's opinions, how they respond to other people's differences in opinion. Because every individual will not have the same opinion, but how do you respond to those differences? But as an interviewer, you did not observe the applicant's responses and behavior, and that is when you fail as an interviewer. Also, the interviewer often does not know the conditions under which the job is performed. So these conditions can be the physical conditions, that what are the particular environment that is required to perform a particular job. There can be stringent physical conditions related to light, temperature, or any other physical aspect could be there. So when the interviewer doesn't know these conditions, he will never appoint or hire a suitable candidate for the particular job. So he must know these conditions under which the jobs are concerned. So the information from interviews is not integrated or discussed in a systematic manner. So this is more applicable when there is a panel interview because several interviewers are judging the same person, and their manner of coming to a particular decision could be different because several interviewers have varied viewpoints on an applicant. So they might share it in a haphazard manner, not identifying or examining any conflicting information. So whenever you conduct a panel interview, you must sit together and integrate whatever views each one of them has. This approach may save time, but in the longer run, when you do not integrate your information, in the longer run it will prove to be a poor hiring decision. So if you have to remove these challenges or barriers, you must integrate or discuss the information from the interviews in a more systematic manner. Then the next barrier is incorrectly interpreting information obtained from an applicant. This can be a case where you are not properly trained. You do not know how to interpret that particular information. Then there can be an unawareness of not dealing directly with biases or against certain types of applicants. So we all know that we have particular mindsets or stereotype is there. So that can also lead to an ineffective interviewing. And then of course conducting a poorly structured or at times an unstructured interview when the interviewer is not skilled enough to conduct a proper unstructured interview. Though at times unstructured interviews are successful, but for then again the interviewer must be skilled and experienced in conducting those types of interviews. Then being overly influenced either favorably or unfavorably by one characteristic or trait of that particular applicant. So the interviewers most of the times they permit one trait or job related attribute to influence their evaluation of the remaining qualities of an applicant. So this process is called the halo effect, and it occurs when an interview judges an applicant's entire potential for the job on the basis of a single characteristic. For example, a candidate is punctual and he reaches well in time or maybe before time. So that gives a good positive impression in the mind of the interviewer, and on the basis of his punctuality he decides that he is the right candidate for the job. Or maybe the applicant is dressed very nicely and the interviewer thinks that he is is a perfect fit for the job. So punctuality and dressing does not quantify you or does not lead you to being a perfect applicant. So that should again be taken care of. Then there can be making a decision based only on intuition or first impressions. So many a times the hirer, they have an intuitive mind. So on the basis of intuition or first impression, they make a judgment or make a decision. So rather than careful insight and analytical judgment, they just decide on the basis of their intuitions, which should be avoided. Then there is problem of different cues used by interviewers. So some interviewers place more weightage on certain attributes than others as they make their overall decisions. For example, some interviewers may give emphasis to educational experiences, like what degree you have or the place of that particular institute from where you have done your education. We all know that, for example, an MBA can be done from any institute, but at times the interviewer gives more emphasis or more credit to people who have done it from IIMs, or others can be giving more weightage to your work experience. So they are not bothered about what education you have, but they are bothered about what kind of work you have been doing. So there are different aspects as far as the interviewers themselves are concerned, so which cause a great barrier for effective interviewing. So we will discuss about how to overcome these barriers and some other aspects of interviews, like the advantages and disadvantages of interviews, in the next lecture. Thank you.